What's wrong with being Josh Briscoe?
Nothing. Just everything.
You said it with such disdain.
It's the last day of July as we're recording this. So you know what that means. We got to predict the entire 53-man roster. Let's go!
This is KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank.
Welcome into a live edition of the KC Laboratory presented by Emprise Bank, member FDIC, our partners in Possible here at KC Sports Network. I'm Ken Swanson, and I am here with definitively the lowest heart rate in all of KC Sports Network. 44, Matthew Lane?
That's right. That's right. I'm so young.
You're going to live to be 200.
Probably. I don't like that you included all of KCS things. KCSN, we've gotten pretty big. We cover a lot of places. We do a lot of things. There's a lot of KCSN people out there. So I don't know necessarily about all of KCSN, but of those that cover the Chiefs, I feel pretty strong coming up the bat with my 44. The nurse was very alarmed. Like at first she said it kind of nonchalantly, and I think she was repeating it in her head before she went and wrote it down, and she looked back at me and goes, is that normal? And I'm like, yeah, that sounds about right. So she was a little concerned at first.
The big turtle, Matthew Lane. You are going to live to be 150. Science has been waiting for you.
Let's go. Me and the turtles just hanging out.
Yeah, and I'm slowly getting more and more uncompetitive in anything now. We've been doing this for like 7 years now, and Smack Talk just does not hit the same way because maybe you are 28. Maybe you actually are 28.
Listen, I found the Benjamin Button action. We're going backwards at this point. We hit the peak, and now we're going backwards. That's the thing. The one-on-one thing doesn't work anymore. We no longer can even joke about one-on-one. It's like now we've moved on to debating, can we play pickleball? Basketball's out the window. We've had to lower it down to pickleball when I'm in town, which should be fun. That'll be a lot of fun either way. But still, we've had to reduce the competition now. We've had to dial it back a little bit.
I'm trying to get you on a golf course. I just, I would love for that to happen because that sounds like a lot of fun. That's all.
For athletics.
No, it's plenty athletic. Look at Scotty Scheffler. That is peak male athleticism.
Ooh, what if we create our own sport? You have to race to the ball, and it's like a timed thing to finish the whole course. It's no longer shots. It's just who can make all 18 holes and then finish the fastest time-wise. But you don't get a golf cart.
Ooh, you'd win. It goes back to the basketball thing. You don't have, it's not a skill competition when we play basketball. You are a ruthless aggressor who wants to just physically dominate me and wear me out. Okay. Whereas I'm a bucket that can shoot you out of the gym with my skill.
I don't like where this is going. This conversation is taking a bad turn here.
We should turn basketball into this overarching 3-tiered competition that one really requires the endurance that you'll probably beat me in. One that requires shooting, we'll just play horse. And then I don't know. We'll both play one-on-one against Craig or something and just see what the outcome is or something. I don't know. Thank you for joining us today. We appreciate you. We are really excited to do a little exercise today. It's always fun to kind of, take a beat and, maybe look at the 53-man roster and how it's shaken out. There's a lot of context clues, I think, that exist when you're looking at training camp. Some wonderful people out there doing some great coverage of training camp, including Tucker D. Franklin, who is doing the Lord's work out there, getting clips up there and also doing some coverage there as well. A lot of great people out there as well, though. So, there's some context clues on the reporting that's out there. And there's also a lot of clips out there that you can kind of start, piecing some stuff together. And some of it doesn't even really require that, right? But Patrick Mahomes has made the roster. I can confirm that per sources. The sources is everything. Anyways,
are you sure? It looked like he was rolling into Nebraska's spring or fall stuff.
Yeah, maybe he's left the team. Yeah,
Carson Wentz had a really good day of practice on Wednesday.
Yeah, the quarterback competition. Some are saying Some are saying that was the wonderful Tucker D. Franklin out there. Let's go ahead and get into this 53-man roster prediction, though. We will start with the quarterback and running back position. And guess what? We're only keeping 2 quarterbacks. And it is the aforementioned Carson Wentz and also the aforementioned Patrick Mahomes. Great. All right, cool. Moving on. You don't have any thoughts on that. You better not have any thoughts on that, Matthew. This is going to take a while.
I feel pretty good about this. I think this is pretty solid. I think this is the right direction here. I feel like in years past, we've always kind of had like a little bit of not real competition about who the backup quarterbacks need, but like people kept trying to push a Shane Buechele or another young quarterback that I think was just around to grow. It feels like this year that's not happening. It doesn't feel like anybody's kind of getting it where nobody's hyping up Ian Book or, somebody like that to push Carson Wentz. So I like that. I like that going into preseason. We don't have to pretend that the guy fresh out of college the past year or two is going to push the long-term veteran that the Chiefs only need to come in case Patrick Mahomes gets hurt to win a playoff game.
Do we think that Chris Oladokun or Ian Book, of those two, who is the practice squad quarterback this year?
Oladokun. Been here longer. I think he's got more physical talent. And if I'm keeping a practice squad quarterback, I am keeping one that can do a better job of mimicking other quarterbacks that might give the team difficulty later in the year. And I think that Oladokun can better mimic a dual threat mobile quarterback than Ian Book can. Although he can still move a little bit.
I would say Ian Book could scoot a little bit here, buddy.
But it's a different kind of scoot. It's a different kind of scoot, though. It's not the same. It's not the same thing.
I tend to agree. I think Chris Oladokun's a more fluid athlete. Like, I know Ian Book does have some athleticism to him and some speed and all that stuff, but like Chris Oladokun has a little bit of flexibility to his athleticism, which I appreciate. I think it's Chris Oladokun. We can move on to the running back position. We kept 3. We only kept 3 for this exercise, and we've been back and forth, but I think you'll kind of see where things shake up a little bit here. As we're kind of, you only got a few spots. We kept 1. We actually, it wasn't a balanced roster. Normally it's 25-25 offense defense. We actually didn't have that happen, and there was some tough decisions that had to be made. But Isaiah Pacheco, Deneric Prince, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire are the 3 running backs. I mean, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I think he's comfortably on the roster at this point. Deneric Prince is the one that might be pushing to take some of his opportunities and his reps, though, Matthew.
Yeah, I think Deneric Prince, we'll have to see how the preseason goes. Last year, I know in the training camp, he looked really good, but it was his first year, and then preseason hit, and it kind of looked like the moment was a little too big for him. He looked more hesitant. You didn't see the same flashes. Now, I think if you go back and watch, especially the final preseason game, you could see the things that he was really good at against the Browns. They still stood out, but it just wasn't consistent and it didn't show up the first 2 weeks. So like it was clear he needed that redshirt year, but it seems like at training camp, he is once again impressing. And now I know Clyde hasn't been there all the time, but like he was back today and it still seems like Prince is getting all the opportunities to be, the backup running back, the RB2, getting the main guy to come in behind Pacheco. So I think it's worth at least seeing. I think he gives you a little bit more. We think this running back room needs 2 things. They need somebody that can be a third down running back. So pass catch and pass protect. And Pacheco showed good hands last year. A lot of checkdowns, a lot of short stuff, but he did show the ability to catch better than we had seen the year prior or any time in college. So maybe he's turning that direction, but they need someone that can pass protect, be a third down running back, and they need kind of a dynamic guy. Pacheco looks quicker this year. I think he lost weight to be faster. He looks thinner, but he's not a super dynamic runner in the open field. He's very much charging straight ahead. There's some build-up speed. They need a dynamic player. Prince might be able to fill that role. He can catch a football very well. That's what he was making all the highlights for in training camp last year. And he definitely is a guy that can hit top speed pretty quick. He's not super jittery with his moves. It's not hard, crisp cuts, but he maintains speed when he's changing angles. He moves very smooth through his angles. And so I think that he could present that dynamic open field player that they haven't had.
I think the Chiefs do desire a little bit more dynamic open field playmakers from the back position, which is why it seems like they might be getting some guys a little bit more involved at the receiver spot and trying to get those guys some opportunities out of the backfield. We've seen things like, even Nico Remigio getting a little run in the backfield here with some plays. So I'm fascinated to see if that's where they, try to get some of those guys some opportunities as well. Looking at some of the guys that were on the fringe of the running back position.
There you go.
You got Carson Steele, Keontae Ingram, and Louis Rees-Zammit all on the outside looking in at this projection right now. Carson Steele getting some run with the second team. Keontae Ingram getting a little bit as well. And Brett Veach decided Keontae Ingram is a guy to look out for. Then Louis Rees-Zammit, he's not a running back. He's not. He's not an offensive player yet. And I think we've kind of been on the forefront of like, hey, look, it's probably going to be an uphill battle there. The special teams value is where he's going to have to make this roster. And as of right now, I don't know if there's anything so far that we've seen to say that, that he's a serious factor in the special teams area that's going to warrant devoting an entire roster spot to him right now. Now, maybe they're playing a little bit coy with their ability to kick things off, and maybe they're trying to keep their cards close to the vest on who's kicking off and keep their cards close to the vest on some of that. But as of right now, I think Carson still has a better chance of making the roster right now than Louis Rees-Zammit does.
Yeah, I mean, of those three running backs that we have just kind of sitting out there, I think Carson Steele seems to be the guy that would be next up. I don't know what to do with Keontae Ingram because I don't think his skill set was ever standing out at one specific thing. It was just a matter of being pretty good across the board, being solid at everything and getting that extra year that you thought he would stand out more, but it just doesn't seem like that's been the case. Now, maybe during preseason games or maybe that we don't see during the practices, that's been the case and he's still in the hunt, but it's hard to pick out where Keontae Ingram would fit within this running, guys making the roster. Whereas Carson Steele, it makes sense. You're like, hey, here's a big fullback, H-back-esque runner that you can put behind the line of scrimmage. He can be a lead blocker or be a short yardage guy. 100% get it. And I think he's really worth having that conversation. However, I mean, we'll get to it here in a little bit, but like we kept an extra tight end. And I think it came down to, are you keeping a fourth tight end or are you putting a pseudo fullback running back on the roster? And I think because you're dealing with an undrafted free agent running back, that's a position that you're probably still going to use very seldomly. If you're talking about the Chiefs offense, that it made more sense to go with a fourth tight end over a fourth running back.
Well, there's even more layers to that conversation too. And we'll just move on to the pass catchers right now. We'll just go ahead and go to the pass catchers right now with the 53-man roster prediction. So start with the wide receivers. We kept 7 on this 53-man roster projection.
That's right.
And we went back and forth on all this. And I'm not even sure like we're in love with the decision to keep 7 in our predictions. But it's Hollywood Brown, Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy, McCole Hardman, Justin Watson, Nico Remigio, and Kadarius Toney. As of right now, we've got 7 receivers making the 53-man roster. Let's talk with the guys that we have making the roster first. Kadarius Toney, it seems like they have a package plan for him. They want to try to use him a little bit on special teams. They're trying to use him a little bit in the backfield. It feels like he is the
already
talent
hurt.
Is he's already hurt too, but it just feels like from a talent perspective, they just don't want to give up on that yet.
Yeah, I guess. It does seem like they're trying to find a way to make it happen. And I always wonder when it comes to this, I don't know what Kadarius Toney has done in the NFL to keep garnering chances beyond you need to prove it to be here. And he continues to not prove it. Right. So there's some draft stock that he was spent. There's the draft capital spent to acquire him from the Chiefs to get him on their team for the trade. Like something I feel like not field related has to be helping Kadarius Toney continue to get these chances because it's nothing on the field. Sans one punt return, in the Super Bowl, which is a big play. But like outside that, nothing's really happened to make him be worthy of changing him position numerous times, changing his role as a wide receiver, now trying him at running back, just finding ways to make him fit. It feels like they're going out of their way to make that happen. So it's a little frustrating, but at the same time, it does not seem like they want to give up on him. He is a dynamic athlete that if it does ever click, you now get a very dynamic player. It feels like you've been waiting a long time to click. Now, I think the whole point though is he's the last wide receiver in here. I don't think Kent actually didn't have him on his. And I said, I think you got to slide Kadarius Toney in here. And the whole point is he's got to know that he's one of the last guys to make it. There's no guarantee he's playing week in and week out, but maybe we can design a package of plays for him. Maybe we can find a way to use him in this very specific situation. Maybe we get a running back injury and we need him as a pass catcher or, gets 1 to 2 carries out of the backfield, whatever it is. It's a very specialization usage thing for him. And so it's there. I think I didn't feel comfortable full out cutting him yet. However, this injury thing, we're right back on it.
It's kind of the broken record. I think fun thing moving forward, there's really not a ton of consensus for us here. Like we went back and forth, and like none of us felt super strong about some of these, and some of it, like one of us felt stronger about one of the other ones, which could make it fun. I think it's worth talking about the totality of all these positions of players, and that's why we're doing it. Is even the players on the outside looking in. I think I did see an interesting question here from Brian Parrott. Who is the first off the list if they keep 6? And I think that's a great transition into talking about the value of Nico Remigio, because I think Nico Remigio actually has a leg up on Kadarius Toney right now, or an ankle up, depending on what that injury was. But I consider Nico Remigio safer right now than Kadarius Toney, because I think there's a little bit more consistency and trust with the special teams value of it, and there's more consistency and trust offensively, I think, too. Like, this is a guy I think, that is starting to build some chemistry with Patrick Mahomes. I think Nico got on the podium today and talked a little bit about, understanding a little bit better what it takes, and what Patrick Mahomes likes. Yep. And you've seen him make a few plays, and you've seen Patrick Mahomes give him a few opportunities here. I'm not out here to say that Nico Remigio is going to be a part of this rotation, but I think from a special teams value, I think from a trust perspective, there's a lot going for Nico Remigio, and the coaching staff loves him, and, who knows what this next month looks like anyway when it comes to Kadarius Toney's health. But I think I'd give the nod to Nico Remigio right now over Kadarius Toney.
No, for sure. And I'm doing that because, and this is a big part of it too. So, I mean, first of all, shout out Eddie High, one of the OG Chiefs camp people here, and he said Nico over Sky for special teams purposes. And I agree. And we'll talk Sky more in a second, but that's also what I'm using to say. I would say if they're keeping 6, it's Nico over Kadarius Toney. It's for the same thing. It's special team purposes, because I don't trust Kadarius Toney to stay healthy for an entire year as my main returner and player, no matter what. But also Kadarius Toney, again, there's the big, great return in the Super Bowl. His average punt return is 7 yards in the NFL. That's not good. That's not very good. He has not been historically in the NFL a very good punt returner. He doesn't make mistakes frequently, but he hasn't been great at it. So they're constantly trotting out there Luis Rees-Zammit and Nico Remigio as kind of the 2 first kick returners. And you're getting Nico as one of the first couple punt returners. Like, he seems to be at the forefront of all of the return lines every time they go through that kind of special team stuff. I think he's the type of guy that if you made him run down and be a gunner or something on the kickoff or the punt team, that he would happily do it. And Sky Moore probably would. Kadarius Toney might, but he might get hurt. You don't know. And I don't mean that as like a shot at him, just he struggles to stay healthy. So I think the special teams value alone makes me feel pretty confident that Nico's making this roster. I think the conversation gets a little trickier if it comes down to a McCole Hardman or a Nico Remigio. I think there's room for both to make it, but if that's what the conversation boils down to, I wonder how that plays out.
I agree. I think that could get a little dicey. I think you notice we don't have Sky Moore on here. I could see Sky Moore being packaged in some kind of trade. Honestly, I think this is a guy that they could try to recoup a little bit of value out. And when I say a little bit of value, I mean it's Amir Smith-Marset level of value, conditional late day 3 pick if he makes the roster kind of thing is somewhere else. I don't really think the way this roster is constructed, there's space for Sky Moore or Justin Ross. They've stretched themselves to keep 7 in the past. They might stretch themselves to keep 7 again this time, but it's a little bit trickier now because they have 2 established players and some of the carryovers of the players that proved to be consistent in the home stretch. Last year, the reason they kept 7 was partially just because it was a little bit of a shotgun approach, but now you've kind of got some definitions there. You've got Xavier Worthy there. You've got Hollywood Brown, but you've also got the carryovers of a Rashee Rice, Justin Watson, and McCole Hardman back into the mix. And I think there's a reason McCole is back is because there's really not a ton of guys that are overly excited about the bottom of this receiver room. And, McCole has a skill set that the Chiefs know how to use. So this is a different year, and we have them stretching to keep 7. Won't be stunned if they keep 6. And I think Justin Ross and Sky Moore are on the outside looking, and I could see them trying to trade a little bit, try to trade Sky Moore in some capacity, just a team that loved him out of the draft.
Sky Moore for me feels like it's pretty much like as good as gone. And it seems like since pads have come on, he's He's maybe bounced back a little bit, or rather than bounce back, he's made some flashes, but I think there's also been, and they haven't, maybe been on social media as much, also some of the same blunders that we have seen throughout his first 2 years in the NFL, right? There's been good and bad with him. It's not like he has just been good during camp. There's a lot of stuff not making it, I think, to social media where he has struggled just as like he has during games. So I think Sky Moore's as good as gone on making this team. I really would have a hard time finding a way to fit him on this roster. Justin Ross is more intriguing to me because he has a skill set that nobody else has besides kind of Justin Watson. Now, it seems like Watson's a little bit healthier now, so you don't have to worry about him missing a ton of time, but Ross did play special teams.
And he's not going to be needed as much either. Justin Watson's role is going to be reduced a little bit now too.
Yeah, it's the body type thing that really does intrigue me. You look at this Chiefs wide receiver room, like you look at the guys that we say are making it. Rashee Rice is by far, if you don't include Justin Watson, Rashee Rice is by far the biggest guy at 6 feet, 205 pounds. Like that's their biggest guy. And it's like not even close. He dwarfs over Mecole Hardman, Nico Remigio, Xavier Worthy, Hollywood Brown. He's much bigger than all these guys. So if they did feel like, and we've been saying this for years, they want this, even if it's a sacrificial X wide receiver, like MVS was, that they're going to get 3 to 4 targets a game, but they just want somebody out there in that role. Ross does kind of make sense. He does still have some really good ball skills. He had a kind of wonky year last year with getting, put on the exempt list there for a while. So I could see a small sliver of a path for him to make it based purely on the body type thing. But when I look at the rest of the wide receiver room, it just seems real tight to fit him in there.
My question to you would be, and I think it kind of came up in some of our conversations today, is like, who's rostering Justin Ross? This seems like a guy they're going to be able to comfortably move to the practice squad. And like, that's the only pushback I'll give you a little bit on the Justin Ross. And I think we were talking about that with one of the arguments we were having about one of the other positions too, is like, I think it's the kind of the same thing. I don't think Justin Ross has done remotely enough to be considered a 53-man roster player. So they might be able to put him right back on the practice squad. That's all. Let's take a break. We'll be back to talk about plenty more predictions right after this.
We appreciate you supporting KC Sports Network by listening to our podcast. You have helped us become the highest ranked Chiefs podcast network in 2022 and 2023. And don't forget about our daily Substack newsletter, the best written analysis you can find on the Chiefs straight to your inbox every day. kcsn.substack.com.
Tucker D. Franklin, I would love if you would talk a little bit about the Mint Mobile KC Sports Network hotline. Please dive in here and tell us a little bit about what's going on there.
Well, I'm currently holding the hotline in my hand. I took the hotline with me to St. Joe. The hotline will be coming with me to St. Joe again tomorrow as I go up there for practice once again. Fellas, it's hot out there. I don't know if you know that. Warm one up there in St. Joe this week. But you can send your questions and comments to the KCSN hotline powered by Mint Mobile at 913-407-6524. That's 913-407 Trey Smith Sky Moore, 913-407-6524.
I would love, you're going to be at training camp tomorrow, right, Tucker?
Yes, sir.
Inevitably, there are going to be people listening to this show on their way to St. Joseph tomorrow. I would love for anyone that's listening to this show to send Tucker on some form of scavenger hunt for things at training camp that he has to take pictures of and send to you. Is this, I think that could be a fun game. So text Tucker things that you want him to find at Chiefs training camp and take pictures of and send them to you with the Mint Mobile hotline. So
also ask him a question too. Don't just send him on a scavenger hunt. Like ask a question and then put a scavenger hunt thing in there.
So you could also ask, another thing is too, you can ask questions for any show on KCSN. So if you are a Missouri Tigers fan and you want us to ask a question on the Mizzou That Two podcast that we'll be recording later this week, where we talk about returning starters to the Missouri Tigers football team, you can ask us a question that you would like to feature on there. We've also got some hosts that are going to be coming on, or some guests coming on that I am really excited about. But I'll save that for the Mizzou podcast. And you can also do that if you're a KU fan, K-State, Sporting Kansas City, Royals, or Chiefs fan. KC Current fan as well. You can get those questions in. I will make sure they get to the right place. That is my duty as the hotline holder.
Hotline, the D stands for hotline holder.
Yes, it does.
You should start sending lowlights to people too.
Yeah, you know what? Maybe. Yeah, I've got some videos that haven't seen the light of day that maybe should. I'll just
Yeah,
leave it at that.
We did just get done talking about Sky Moore. Let's move on to the offensive and defensive line predictions.
Should we talk about the tight ends?
You probably should.
Yeah.
First, Tucker tried to leave him off the graphic. Then Kent wants to skip him in the show.
I left him off the full graphic. Yes, I forgot, but it's pretty straightforward.
We kept 4 for now. We kept Irv Smith for now. And honestly, when we were kind of starting this exercise of going through the 53-man roster, I kept 4 just because I know Matty Lane wants to keep 4 for his boy Irv Smith.
Strong use of my boy, but okay.
I was very confused by that as well. I didn't know that Matty was an Irv Smith guy. I believe, actually,
listen to the show you produce sometimes, Tom.
No, I believe when Irv Smith signed, Matty was the one that was like, I don't know if we have to go live for Irv Smith.
I know, but it's funny that like the other day he's like, I don't know. Jared Wiley's not getting cut, but Irv Smith is also very good here too. I do agree. Like there's
very
a skill.
It's again a strong word. I think the entire concept is they might want somebody that can block. And Irv Smith can, or at least he blocked well in some of the clips I have seen at training camp. So if you were looking at a team that is going to try to lean into heavy personnel again, if you're going to look for a team that probably wants to not be like the worst running team out of 13 personnel in the entire league, you might not want to trot out Kelsey, Noah Gray, and Jared Wiley to block on those plays if the goal is to be, a not 31st ranked running team on those downs. Irv Smith has grown into a pretty decent blocker in line and out in space. I think what I've seen so far in camp is he has stood out during their one-on-one drills as a blocker compared to others. I could see a narrow, but a path for him to make this roster. And if we were waffling between Carson Steele as a running back fullback or having a tight end H-back combo, I know which one the Chiefs have typically used a lot more. So I was going to lean on that guy.
Or the defensive players we argued over as well.
There's plenty more. It's just, that was the path that leads to Irv Smith. I just think that his blocking can and will be useful. I think the Chiefs have kept 4 tight ends plenty of times as well. Yep. So it's not like this is completely out of nowhere. They also did bring him in. I'm not saying that because the contract they gave him means a lot, but I do think that he adds a different element than Jared Wiley does. So if you want to get the best of both worlds, it might not be a bad idea to, keep both of them for the year.
I think there's 3 stone cold locks at the tight end position, and you're right, Matthew. If they want to get better at the blocking position at tight end, like they have to keep Irv Smith, and that's one of the debates they're going to have. Is do we trust these guys to block enough to be able to do this, or do we need to bring another guy in? So like that is a legitimate question that's worth having. We kept 4 tight ends for the immediate future here. That's our projection as of July 31st when this is recording. Okay, now we can move on to the offensive line.
There you go.
There we go. This was, we spent way too much time debating the merits of Lucas Niang, but we did have Lucas Niang making the roster. We'll get to him in a second. The tackles, Kingsley Suamataia, Wande Morris, Jawan Taylor, and Chu Godric. I think one thing that's been a little bit fascinating to me about the offensive line and the roster construction has been, I don't think they're like, the Chiefs typically try to keep 10 offensive line. Don't blame them at all. It doesn't feel like there's a ton of players pushing for opportunity to be in the top 10, but rather there's not really a ton of competition into the top 10 as much as like 10 that seem pretty clear and obvious or are pretty close. There's like 11 players that we really truly considered, where maybe other years we might, have a more difficult time keeping players off the roster, in that top 10 offensive line. Tackle, there's really not a ton of competition outside the top 4, depending on what you want to classify a Lucas Niang as.
Yeah, and so spoiler, you said it. We're keeping Lucas Niang. So if you wanted to come at me and say that you could go down to 9 on the offensive line, drop out Chu Godric because Lucas Niang could be tackle, and we have listed him with the interior, also play interior, you could kind of have a guy with more positional flexibility. I could see the path for a Chu Godric not making it if they don't think he's like definitely better than Lucas Niang. The problem is, I think Chu Godric has done enough from last year to this year to be an intriguing player. And
Yes.
I do wonder, just a guy with his build, his athleticism, his background, if once teams see him in preseason, this is a little bit kind of predicting, a little bit of projecting, but if there's not enough flashes in preseason that you won't be able to sneak that body type onto a practice squad. That I kind of feel like you might have to, whether or not he's better than a Lucas Niang right now this year, he might be the kind of guy that you have to protect by keeping him on the 53-man roster as a guy that's never going to be active unless a bunch of injuries come in. But I can see that path for him. I don't know. There wasn't really too much of a debate in my mind about tackle besides that, because I do think they choose on that trajectory right now.
I mean, Chu Godric was getting some opportunities to slide into the tackle spot, with the first team. And so I mean, this is a guy that I think Maddie was the one that was first on Chu Godric and seeing his feet and his movement skills a little bit. And what he was able to do there. And it doesn't seem like he's had a hard time sticking around a little bit more there. And I think he's pushing for an opportunity to make this roster this year. I really do. So as of right now, we got 4 tackles making the roster. But yeah, Lucas Niang's got a unique classification here. We've got Joe Thuney, Trey Smith, Lucas Niang, Mike Caliendo making it as guards. So Lucas Niang has the inside out, flexibility, and that's really why we kept him. Why Maddie was pushing very hard to keep him over CJ Hansen, who was also in the hunt there. But yeah, Lucas Niang has a lot of experience as far as just being in this system. He's been here for multiple seasons. He has some inside outside flex that kind of pushed him for you over CJ. So make the case for a Lucas Niang.
You already did. He can play tackle, and they've been working him out at guard. They feel, like if he had to step in at guard in a pinch, I would feel comfortable. And it's not like he'd be the first guard up either. He would still be the third guard. He's the last guard coming up. But the fact that he can fill both tackle and guard roles kind of gives him a little bit of a boost. CJ Hansen, I guess, can fill like guard and center, but here's the thing. Hunter Norzad and Mike Caliendo also already do that. It's like you're looking at with Hansen, you would be looking at your third guard center. Lucas Niang is your only tackle / guard that you have as a reserve. So it just kind of a number-wise made sense. And then also CJ Hansen was a 7th-round draft pick this past year. I don't think there's teams knocking down the door to sign him if he goes to the practice squad. Not that they are for Lucas Niang either. I'm not saying that, but I don't think there's a huge risk for CJ Hansen to get to your practice squad given the draft capital that they were able to use to get him. Go ahead and give me the guy that has a little bit more versatility that they don't have. And this goes back to our earlier point. I know we're projecting Chu Godric to kind of look better in the preseason, but is he ready to step in and play right away? Is he ready? If Jawan Taylor gets hurt, are we sure that Chu Godric is a guy going to step in for a game right now? Or is he just a guy they want to keep to develop until he gets to that point? And it wouldn't be Lucas Niang. So go ahead and give me Niang's versatility and just the fact that he's been here. He's played NFL snaps at right tackle.
Also, if they keep 9, maybe the breaking case of emergency Donovan Smith bat phone comes out too. There's at least like a little bit of maybe if there's some shuffling there on the offensive line, they're just calling, they're calling Donovan Smith and hollering at him and see what happens. But that could be a scenario where they try to keep 9 too. I could see them trying to do that. CJ Hansen, though, if he shows out in any semblance during the preseason games, I think you're gonna have a hard time keeping him off the roster. So that's the only nugget I'll say there is I think CJ Hansen has an elite athletic profile, and if he shows enough progress here in the games that the entire NFL is going to be privy to, that could be something that makes this thing a little bit more difficult for them to kind of try to navigate the bottom of the roster. I feel like
Hansen's the guy that us as Chiefs fans, especially those that really like the draft and watch college players, Hansen's the guy that we're all going to say there's no way he makes to a practice squad if he shows out. He's too talented. And then he goes to the practice squad without a single team looking at him because they all had 7 chances to already and decided not to. Now, again, not that he can't play great in the preseason, but look at where the cut day happens. These GMs and stuff, they're looking at their own roster, trying to cut down from 90 some guys to 53 because this 7th-round pick who maybe looked pretty good against third stringers looked good as all of a sudden they're going to be like, wait, we should cut one of our guys that we've had here all camp and bring in this rookie that we passed on drafting a bunch of times. He seems like a pretty safe practice squad player to me. So like that's the only way I go with that. And I did want to ask you, if they do keep 9, who's the offensive lineman out for you?
I could see it. Like, I think the Chu Godric argument's fair. Like, I think that's probably what it looks like. I think just because of positional flex, like they might like Lucas Niang's ability to move around, and they think they can sneak Chu Godric onto a practice squad because no one's ready to put him on a 53-man roster.
And they technically still they can still use the exemption for him. If I'm not mistaken, but that means they couldn't use it on Luis Rees-Zammit. I'm not entirely sure how the whole thing goes, but I'm pretty sure they can still use it on Chu Godric again. And that would technically...
There's not a 53-man roster exemption.
No, it would be the practice squad one, but he can't be signed. If I'm not mistaken, you can't sign a player that's used on. Another team couldn't. So there wouldn't be the fear that somebody would sign Chu Godric away from them. It's just you couldn't then use it on Luis Rees-Zammit if you wanted to protect him as well. You can only use it on one guy, but you can protect, so to speak, an international player from being signed to another team. So that could be another thing that factors in for why maybe it would be Chu Godric instead of Lucas Niang that would be the one that would be cut.
Let's go to center.
Okay.
Pretty simple. Hunter Nourzad. Pretty self-explanatory. Hunter Nourzad, thought I saw some clips today. I thought he looked good. So continuing to kind of build there, playing left guard with the ones. Kind of curious how that battle with him and Caliendo go. Fascinated, really. I mean, yeah, because like I agree with Maddie. Like I think Caliendo's looked fine. I don't think there's been a Mike Caliendo problem. I'm hoping Hunter Nourzad just continues to ascend because I think this is a guy that can, potentially either be a Nick Allegretti in a pinch, or if you're hoping a little bit more, even a little bit more than that. So we can finally get onto the defensive side of the football. It's been 37 minutes, so we can finally get there. We can look. Tucker wants to share the 53-man roster predictions on offense. There they are. We're keeping 26. That's where we stand today. Mahomes, Wentz,
Man,
Pacheco,
I don't. Craig listens sometimes. Sorry, I'm interrupting you. Craig listens sometimes. He's rolling over right now. Not in a great, just rolling over because you just constantly diss the defense. You just have to get 26 offensive players, not even split offense and defense, just always giving the defense the shaft.
That's my objective here. So we're gonna continue to thrive. All right, defensive end, and honestly, I don't love where we sat with the defensive line situation here. Candidly, and I don't think either of us did, but this is where we landed. 4 defensive ends: George Karlaftis, Mike Dana, Felix Enudike Uzama, and Malik Herring are your 4 defensive ends. That is very light than what we've historically seen out of a Steve Spagnuolo defense and out of a roster projection. 4 is very light for what we are accustomed to. Charles Omenihu is on the PUP list to start the season, so we're probably not going to see him. But I think the conversation stems around when you're looking at some of these other roster spots and you're looking at some of these positions, you're trying to figure out like, okay, is it worth keeping Truman Jones, which I'm a Truman Jones fan, but is he shown enough in this training camp really to, force the hand of the Chiefs to, push some of these other roster crunches on the offensive side of the football out? And that's really where the question comes. I had Truman Jones in at first, and when you're trying to get down to 53, it gets a little tricky because, I'm not sure the Chiefs really have 5 defensive ends that are worth saying, you know what, we probably can, get away with, moving on from an Irv Smith or, we'll see, the Kadarius Toney, Nico Remigio. Like, would you rather have Nico Remigio? I'm just using this as an example because the Chiefs might view it differently. Would you rather have Nico Remigio on the roster or Truman Jones at this point? I think you're probably going Nico Remigio. So we only had 4 defensive ends at this point.
Yeah, I don't like it. The Chiefs have done that before. The Chiefs have gone with 4 defensive ends for stretches, especially to account for injuries. So with assuming, say Charles Omenihu is your injury, going with only 4 defensive ends wouldn't be crazy, but you don't know when he's going to return. So I don't feel great about this. And the problem was, and I think this is a bigger issue just as the Chiefs, the way they are kind of built right now, who who's demanding that we put them in? Like you said, we both like Truman Jones, but what have we seen from him to say like, wow, we have to get him on the field? Did he play pretty well? I think when he was able to get a little bit of playing time last year in the preseason or that final game of the regular season, yeah, there was some flashes, but like nothing that we saw during that or training camp makes you say you have to get him on this active 53. Same thing if you look at anybody else that they have. So it's just like who needs that spot? Actually, so that's where I get a little confused about how you're going to get more than 4. I think this is a bigger issue. We're not talking about just the defensive end room in general, but like this is why there's a ton of pressure on Felix and Udike Uzomah this year. He's going to have to play. He's going to play a lot. He can't be the 4th or 5th best defensive end on this team this year. He has to be the 3rd. He has to be their 2nd best pass rushing defensive end. Like it's a lot of pressure on him because Malik Herring, again, like the player, I think he's a good snap eater, but he's just that. He's a snap eater. Mike Dana, high-end snap eater, but it's a snap eater are those two guys. Like they need an impact, and now they don't have depth until Omenihu comes back. So I feel like they're really light at this position. I would have felt a lot better had they, signed Emmanuel Ogbah and been able to insert him into it and get him in this spot. Because, yeah, I think only 4 here makes me a very, very nervous, but I just don't see the clear, got to get this guy in here with them.
I think, with some of the spots on this roster too, it's worth letting the dust clear a little bit and acknowledging that you got a little bit of time here to potentially explore a trade, to potentially, I don't think at this point the Chiefs are really rating, the release day or anything like that, but there might be some trade opportunities that present themselves to get them a little bit more of a look at some of these, adding some depth to the defensive end position. And I think that's something that could happen very comfortably, very easily before the Chiefs, finally, go play week 1. So like this is a position I'm definitely looking at. They know, I think, a little bit because they were looking at Emmanuel Ogbah, that they need a little bit more depth at that position. So that's something I'm paying a little bit of attention to. Defensive tackle was an interesting one too, because the Chiefs have thrown a lot of bodies at that defensive tackle spot. And Derek Nottie is currently on the PUP list. He has not played a single snap of training camp, which actually could, be beneficial to the Chiefs from a roster crunch perspective, because he could very easily come off this list if he's not participating by September, and it could move one of the most debated players in this conversation as we were going through the 53-man roster is Neil Farrell Jr. We'll get there in a second, but we kept Derek Nottie, Mike Pennell, Chris Jones, and Treshaun Ward for now, assuming Derek Nottie will come off the PUP before the regular season begins. Neil Farrell Jr. was a player that we kind of debated, and when we're talking about, the why you keep a Neil Farrell Jr., I don't know, like you made the case for keeping him when we were going through this exercise, so I'll give you the floor.
Yeah, the thing for Neil Farrell is they traded a pick for him last year and then kept him on the active roster all year long, even though they never played him. Now, okay, they didn't ever really play him. They didn't try to get him on the field, but they kept him around. They kept him around for a reason. I don't know what could have possibly changed from the last year when they were keeping him on the roster after trading for him to now. It's not like there was a huge influx of talent. All that's happened is they signed Derek Nottie and Mike Pennell to both come back on vet minimum deals as veterans. Derek Nottie struggled with his health the past few seasons. Mike Pennell was great for the Chiefs last year down the stretch, but he also played a very small portion of the year. It's not like he played all year for the Chiefs and then played great at the end. Like he just came in, maybe was a little fresh down the stretch and played really good for them. Like I'm glad he's back, but it's just, they've not really put anybody on this roster that says that like they lost whatever faith they had in Neil Farrell. Now we haven't seen it. We haven't seen why they have it, but they made the decision to trade for him and then keep him on the roster. So I was struggling to wrap my head around why they would do that last year. And then what has changed from then till now to just be like, okay, we're done with this. We're done with this project.
I think there's a case to be made. And when you look at, okay, so Neil Farrell Jr., yeah, they gave up a 6th-round pick to try to acquire him. And I get them wanting to have an entire offseason because it's not fair to throw a guy right before the season starts into the mix and say, hey, go out and play. But he didn't find a way to earn the trust of this defensive staff enough during the regular season to justify playing until it was absolutely necessary when Derek Nottie got hurt. And so he never really found his footing. He was active for 3 games, and he really hasn't made an impact. The thing that gives me pause is I don't think we've seen him with the first team defensive tackle room either. I mean, Tucker, you've been there for what? I mean, Tucker, you've been there for what? like most of the practices this season, and Tucker just left. I don't think we've seen him get a ton of run with the first team. So why aren't you at least spelling a 32-year-old defensive tackle, getting some opportunities with the first team if they're not, a little bit optimistic about your outlook? So that's the thing that gives me pause about him. And you wanted the argument for keeping him around. Well, yeah, hold him around, hold inventory for last season, right? And they broke the glass in case of emergency when Derek Nottie got hurt. And at this point, there hasn't been a need to make a decision on him. But with the roster crunches, you might be moving on from another 6th-round pick after giving up a 6th-round pick to draft DeAndre Coburn. They've gone to the well of the veteran defensive tackle spot multiple times here in the last calendar year. I mean, they felt the need to bring Mike Pennell back late last year over a Neil Farrell. So I don't think he's done much to take that step that's earned the trust. They keep going back to the veterans that they've had for I guess the entirety of the Patrick Mahomes era.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have an on-field reason for why he's making the roster. It's just the fact that they traded for him, then they kept him on the roster, right?
Yeah.
And like you say, they didn't feel the need to make the choice. Okay, like, are we saying that this year that keeping 4 DTs is what's going to keep him off the roster? Like, I have a hard time seeing that the same guys, you're saying right now, the same guys that were here last year are now going to bump him off the roster this year. And that's just where I'm struggling to see it. And like, even looking, he played the same amount of snaps as Mike Pennell did for the Chiefs in the regular season last year. I get it. I know Mike Pennell was great in the playoffs. I'm not saying that.
But look how much Mike Pennell played in the Super Bowl relative to what they asked Neil Farrell to do. Like they tried to keep Mike Pennell on the field as much as they could.
This isn't a Mike Pennell versus Neil Farrell thing. It's just like I'm saying, like during the regular season, it's not like either one of those guys played a ton, but they were still keeping Farrell around. They were keeping other guys around. And like we didn't even mention it yet either. Like Matt Dickerson played for this team last year. He played almost 200 snaps. You're losing those snaps. We didn't even bring him up somehow, but you're losing those snaps. If you're also losing, like there's snaps out there to be had for somebody. And I just don't know if the team that kept Neil Farrell all last year through the offseason, through this part of training camps is going to be like, we're good with Derek Nottie, who's not even practicing right now. And Mike Pennell, he's getting up there in age. So it's a weird one. He's going to be a weird one to see because I don't know what he's done to say for sure he needs to be on the team, but I also think that they invested in him and they have proven that they wanted to keep him around at least again before.
It's just such a niche low snap count position too, that justifying a whole roster spot on 3 nose tackle types, like that's also kind of tricky there too, right? Yeah. Joey Ivy's pass rush out there somewhere. But Joey Ivy better not listen because he might come after me on social media again. He was very upset. Let's move on.
I don't like this. I don't like 8's too low. We did something wrong. 8's not enough. We did something wrong. 8's wrong.
But it's just really hard. I think this is like
agree.
if you're looking at the roster construction, this is such an easy place to add a defensive end. And so like that's where I just kind of look at the roster and say like, well, I mean, this team is like to have more than 4 defensive ends typically with Steve, because you're probably getting 3 defensive ends on the field on 3rd down. So only having 4 seems very light relative to what you've seen out of the C Spagnuolo defense very historically. So
8's wrong. My first thing would be if we can't get rid of Tony, because I don't know if the roster wants to, then Shu Godrick's gotta go. Use the exemption for him and get me another defensive lineman somewhere. Especially because without knowing when Omenihu's coming back, who does help because he can play end and inside. But like until then, you need another body. 8's too low, especially because like I said, I don't know if we don't even know if Derek Nottie is going to be ready. Like we're assuming he's going to be ready, but we don't even know if he's ready. Just 8, seeing the numbers, 8's wrong. 8's wrong. We wrong on this one.
I think it's light.
Somebody else is making it.
I think it's just hard to find. I think it's hard to find 9 that justify, because I don't think 3 nose tackles justifies. I just don't, because they're not contributing on 3rd down.
Okay, yeah, fair. I mean, fair. Okay,
I guess
Matt Dickerson it is.
Oh.
I mean,
does the lightness of the defensive end room give you hope that Charles Omenihu's coming back quicker?
No.
Then they should go sign somebody or should trade somebody. And one thing, like the Chiefs have more cap space than they typically had this time of year, and that's something that's made me pay attention a little bit. I mean, they were looking to sign him in the Logba, so I think they're willing to take on a little bit of money in some kind of trade situation. And I think defensive end might be the first place to turn.
Sure.
Cornerback might be second. Anyways, let's move on to linebacker position. We kept 5 linebackers. That's about the number that we typically see from the Chiefs. Bolton, Chanel, Tranquil, for now, Jack Cochran and Cam Jones, the carryovers from last year, have made the roster as we see it. Jack Cochran's been a guy that has a lot of special teams ability, is a guy that apparently was stepping in to play the mic with Nick Bolton's absence. And Cam Jones is another guy I think that the Chiefs have tried to keep around. The one player that we went back and forth on, and I keep trying to find a way to put him in some of the clips I've seen, I'm kind of impressed with Curtis Jacobs, the linebacker, undrafted free agent linebacker out of Penn State. He gives a different flavor than what a Cam Jones and a Jack Cochran do from a depth perspective. He's a guy that I actually think could play capably. It has some coverage ability, and I think he could be an elite special teams player. I think this is a player that very easily could, unseat one of those two guys if the Chiefs feel comfortable about the depth of their linebacker position. I'm a fan of Curtis Jacobs, but for now, we're keeping him off the roster.
Jack Cochran played the most special team snaps for the Chiefs last year, and Cam Jones played the 5th most special team snaps for the Chiefs last year. So I feel pretty good about those two for that. And then Cochran is the backup Mike, like he was last year when Nick Bolton got hurt. It wasn't Drew Tranquil. It was the backup Mike, like during the game, was Jack Cochran is the guy that came in for it. He is the guy that got run in that spot. Cam Jones played in bits when guys were hurt. So like I feel pretty good, pretty confident about the linebacker room. Curtis Jacobs is an interesting one. If they feel like they are missing the element that Willie Gay had, like that specific element on defense, then I could see trying to flip Cam Jones out for a Curtis Jacobs. I could see that coming if they specifically are like, we just need that speed at linebacker for reason X, Y, or Z. But if it comes down to just special teams or something like that, I don't know why you would disrupt what Cam Jones was already able to do. And it's not like he played bad at linebacker when he was given opportunity. So I feel pretty confident in this 5. Curtis Jacobs is interesting, but again, it's another guy that you probably can get onto your practice squad because nobody wanted him through the process.
Tucker D. Franklin's back. We did try to go to him for a second. His computer did crash. So we are glad to have Tucker D. Franklin back. So thank you. Everything okay, Tuck?
I think so. Maddie was in the middle of talking, and I guess he was making some really good points, and my computer just had to do a quick little reboot real quick.
Too much heat.
So sorry about that.
Let's go to the defensive backs. Last kind of cluster of players before we get out of here. As of now, we're keeping 7 cornerbacks. Jalen Watson, Trent McDuffie, Kelvin Joseph, Joshua Williams, Nick Jones, Nazeeh Johnson, and we have Kamal Haddon making the roster currently out of the picture were Keith Taylor and Echo Boy-Doe. I think 2 players that could find their ways on the practice squad as well. The cornerback position feels a little bit like last year's receiver position where you're throwing a few bodies at it. You like a lot of the guys. There's some players that have shown some ability. There's some players that have got some run with the first team, but you don't really know how that whole position group's going to settle out entirely. So you have to keep a few more numbers than maybe you would otherwise do. And that's kind of, I feel like, what we did at the cornerback position, Maddie.
Seeing this now, one of these cornerbacks has got to go for a defensive lineman of some sort, and that was one of the big decisions. I think it should be Neil Farrell or Kamal Haddon. I was didn't have either one of them on there. And I was kind of saying, I think one of these two has to make it. Here's my case for both of them. We settled with Haddon because it does seem like he at least got a little bit more run, like with the second team. Like he just seemed like he was maybe a little bit further along the depth chart at training camp, but I don't know if that matters. It's just a numbers game. Seems like I think if I were to go back and switch it, maybe Neil Farrell over Haddon. But the issue is, look at the cornerback room. They're all hurt. Everyone's hurt. Like you just want to have guys out there that aren't hurt because right now, Jalen Watson just came back, hasn't practiced yet, but he's been dealing with an injury all off season long now. Nazeeh Johnson still hurt. Like just all these guys are getting hurt. So I was just like, why don't we throw another corner out there? They've played him inside at the slot. They've played him outside as well. Maybe he's doing a little bit something to keep him. But now that I see this, I think he might be the sub out for another defensive lineman of some sort.
I think what's hard is, and this is kind of where the conversation really tails, is when you're looking at some of the players the Chiefs might have to give up at some of these positions versus who's actually earning it or who's just next up at some of these spots. Yeah. Because I don't think the Chiefs have 9 defensive linemen worth it right now. Maybe you can argue Farrell, but that doesn't give you juice in your pass rush. So how do you
gotta eat snaps though?
Yeah, but you're gonna have 3 nose tackles eating snaps. Like Neil Farrell's probably he's probably not on the game day roster. They're not rostering 3 nose tackles. Like they never have. So it's like, what are you doing there, right? Like selfishly is not the right word, but like Derek Nottie doesn't practice all training camp and he starts the season on the pup. That gives you an extra roster spot to work another, defensive lineman in there, potentially like a Farrell or, a Farrell. So that helps you keep the inventory a little bit there. But you still, you've probably got to find another place to add another pass rusher, another defensive end. Like, I think that's where this team, I think when we're going through this exercise, that's where the team really struggles the most is the edge rusher. But looking at the defensive
what's the answer? What's the answer of the roster, right? Like, no, you're just saying like you can't. But Neil Farrell doesn't do anything for you in the pass rush. Like, I don't disagree, but like, what's your answer on this roster to get another pass rusher? I'm with you. There's not 9 defensive linemen with Omenihu being hurt that you scream they got to make this roster, but you kind of need a 9th guy. So who's it going to be? BJ Thompson, with his circumstance right now, that stinks because he would be in that running. Truman Jones, you would love to see some flashes to push him up there, but you just don't. He's more
Mike Dana than he is a pass rusher anyway.
Right. No. So you don't have a solution. And at this point, if you don't have a solution, why haven't you went out and found one? I get it. I know they were, interested in Agba, but they still haven't gone out and signed somebody else. So it feels like they have to have an in-house path that they feel comfortable with. What is it if it's not another nose tackle? I don't know. That's where I was getting stuck. But back to the point, seven corners now, seeing everything else is wild.
It is, but it's also like justifying the talent ability of the player versus roster construction as we sit today. I think cornerback, I agree, because I was kind of arguing for 6 at one point. I think 6 is, I think you lop one of these guys off to add that defensive end potentially. I think this is one of the positions you make the argument to say, okay, when we add a 5th edge rusher to this roster somewhere from outside of probably from outside of Kansas City via trade or what have you, I think this is one of the first places you look to try to move on. But if I'm sitting here, I have a hard time saying that the Chiefs should keep Truman Jones over Kamal Hadden right now. I mean, I have a hard time saying that, right? It's Irv Smith versus Neil Farrell versus Truman Jones versus Kamal Hadden versus Kadarius Toney right now. I think, it is really what you're kind of looking at when you're looking at the roster construction. And right now it's tough to make those decisions about some places that I would be concerned about. I am concerned about the Chiefs' depth at some of these spots. I'm concerned about the defensive end position in the depth right now because I don't think it's where you want it to be. So this is where it kind of settled based on ability and who you would most hate to see leave, even though the Chiefs probably need help at a couple of their positions.
I don't envy the position they're going to find themselves in here with this because, Nick Jones, Kamal Hadden, do with them whatever you will. I think Kelvin Joseph has kind of separated himself from those two. I think those two are very clearly on the back end of this.
Yes.
Both of them don't seem like they have a firm home in terms of outside or slot corners. And if they are in the slot, they're like the 3rd or 4th slot corner the Chiefs prefer to go with. They're also like the 4th or 5th outside corner they prefer to go with. So both of those guys making this roster actually does seem less and less likely. And I think we kind of reached this point before. You just weren't convicted that Neil Farrell should make the roster over one of them too. And we just kind of got ourselves lost with how to fill out this defensive side of the ball, because they do seem like we don't seem to have the depth, the talent at the depth to round out 24 guys, let alone 25, to make it fully even across the board.
Or justify it. We've run out of talent. We've run out of talent for the back end of the defensive side of the ball here. And I agree with that the more we go through this. Yeah, and I just don't see them keeping 3 noses. And that's where it gets tricky. It's that's one
Matt
of the first.
Dickerson, come on down.
Oh.
You keep sighing and rolling your eyes, but they've proven that they want to put him out there. They trust him to go out there, and he is more 3-tech than nose tackle, I guess. So
it's Chris Dickerson and a couple edge and Felix and George on 3rd down.
I mean, Dana's probably playing inside on 3rd down over
Dickerson.
And Tershawn Wharton's playing over Dickerson. These are just guys that are eating snaps. I mean, Dickerson might not even be, that defensive tackle might not even be ready, active or whatever. It's just about, you got to eat snaps. This is a long season. long season. They play a lot of snaps. You got to eat snaps to start the year. So the good players are fresh come playoff time, right? And so you don't want to have Chris Jones having to play 90% of the snaps. You don't want Tershawn Wharton. I mean, he's just not the body type, but you don't want him playing 70% of the snaps. You know what I mean? Like, you got to save some of these guys' bodies. So you need a more defensive lineman. And if you are concerned about having too many nose tackle types that don't help at all on pass rushing, which is understandable, Dickerson seems like the most obvious choice to slot in and get a spot.
What's your rush? Who's your 4 on third down right now?
I mean, we just said him. I mean, it's going to be, you're going to, mine.
Yeah.
Mine. I'm putting, okay. We're going to have George Karlaftis, and next to George, we're going to have, Chris Jones, and next to Chris Jones, we are going to have Tershawn Wharton, and next to Tershawn Wharton, we're going to have Leo Chenal. No, I mean, I would put Mike Dana out there, maybe even Chris Jones as a defensive end. Do that weird stack where they put Chris Jones as like the 9 and they put Dana or Karlaftis as the 7, and they kind of run their weird little game next to it, whatever it is. That's where I would go. I know they want it to be Felix. It needs to be Felix. Right now, if you were telling me I had to get a sack, I'm trusting Dana over him.
Yeah.
And Tershawn Wharton over him.
Yes, there's a defensive line issue, but I think the biggest issue is at edge. And I think they might have to figure something out before the season ends. If they have any injury at edge, like, yikes.
Ooh, are we sleeping on, like, did we bury the lead here? Is this just a sign? Do we just keep Curtis Jacobs instead of another defensive lineman, just play 3-3-5 even more? Let's go. There it is. Lock it in, Craig. Get Craig back on here. We got to do a whole 3-3-5 podcast.
I mean, maybe that's where they go. I keep going back to Omenihu. Maybe they know something about Omenihu's availability sooner rather than later that we don't. And if they think he's getting back into the swing of things before the regular season starts, maybe that's the path to this making a lot more sense. Like, that would make a lot more sense. So, Tucker?
Yeah, I did notice something when he's like working out. He doesn't have like a brace on. So he doesn't wear any sort of like knee brace or anything when he's doing his off to the side work with the trainers. And they're putting him through it, right? Like, it's a very physical workout. But I found that surprising that, like, he tore his ACL a little bit ago and was not wearing a brace. I don't know how common that is, but
it's been like 7 months too, right? That's it, right?
Yeah, it was January.
I don't know.
Not even like early January.
Yeah, it was late January, almost into February.
Good on him, and I hope he just proves everyone wrong. He would be a huge,
especially Seth.
Definitely Seth.
Yeah. Move to the safeties, Tucker. We've gone over the hour. You know how I feel about that. Yeah.
We kept 4. The same 4 you thought.
Yep. Justin Reed, Shamari Connor, Brian Cook, Jaden Hicks. Now, fascinating to see when Justin Reed gets back. Some people I believe Nate Taylor has speculated that he could maybe miss the start of the season potentially. So that changes the number crunches. I think Deion Bush is your safety 4. If that is the case, if Justin Reed does indeed miss the beginning of the season, we're keeping those 4 right now. But I think the number of safeties that's kept is 4. And that's kind of, whether or not Justin Reed continues to be on the pup to start the season, or it's Deion Bush in his place, or he's back. The number's 4. And I think that's the top 5 if I'm tearing them out. Christian Roland Wallace, I believe, has seen some snaps with the second team, though. And maybe there's just not a ton of safety depth, anyways. But I did think that was a little bit interesting that he was getting a little bit of run up the depth chart just a little bit.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to say. Justin Reed's injury obviously probably makes Deion Bush coming to play early in the season a higher possibility, but like, he's probably not going to make the initial roster. We already talked about this. Like, we can make a case for at least 7, if not 8 or 9 corners to make this roster. Like, not saying that they got 9 deep, but like, you could make the case for about 9 corners to be on the 53-man roster. So it doesn't even like make sense to talk about Shamari Connor's ability to play in the slot as a corner as well. Cause like, they're not lacking for corners. They might be lacking at safety depth a little bit. Cause yeah, after the first 4, Deion Bush is fine as a guy to come in and play, but like, there's nobody really knocking on the door to break into, I think, that starting lineup. So solid 4, I think. It sounds good there. That gets us to 24 defenders. I don't think, like we talked about a bunch, we don't feel particularly great about it. The back end of that 24 is pretty rough.
Yeah, it's been a little tricky to do this exercise, and I think it just kind of identifies where the biggest needs, I think, as we see it for the roster are. I mean, Matt, do you argue that another defensive end's not the most important position to add to this roster?
I think there's another defensive lineman. I get your point about not having another pass rusher. But like I'm fine with an extra nose tackle at this point. I really am. I could live with another. They need another body up front. They need another body up front to just eat some snaps at some point in time.
Matty hates pass rush. That's going to do it for the KC Laboratory. Thank you all so much for listening. We appreciate you. We love you. We'll catch you later.
Poor defense.